Now, I don't know if you can tell it just by looking at me, but I am an asshole. The question is, am I an asshole for no reason?
This video is specifically about pronouns.
Hold it right there! Pronoun trouble.
I'm really hesitant to get involved in the whole how many genders are there conversation because it kind of reminds me of the whole black people can't be racist conversation, in that there's basically a lot of people talking past each other and no one's really making any attempt to understand what someone else is trying to say.
I love this little cop-out. I can't get involved because people just talk past each other. And then he gets involved. And then he proceeds to talk past his opposition.
At the end of the day, you don't get to tell someone else that their personal identity is wrong. That's literally incoherent. That's not how personal identity works. Like if I tell you I'm a Packers fan, you don't get to say, you're not a Packers fan. You don't live in Wisconsin. You're not a real Packers fan. You're just saying that for attention. That's not how that works. Like I get to decide. You don't get to decide for me.
It's an interesting analogy. But when I explore it a little bit, I find that it doesn't necessarily help you out. Because you see, I'm a Chiefs fan, and I have always been a Chiefs fan, real die-hard Kansas City fan. And maybe I decide that I want to be a Dolphins fan too. Maybe it's because, I've got a girlfriend who's a big-time Dolphins fan, or maybe I've moved down to Florida and I want to support the local team. Then if I decide I want to be a Dolphins fan, then I can be a Dolphins fan, and you can't tell me that I'm not. That's true. However, there's a difference when I'm actually watching football, because if I were to watch a Dolphins game and the Dolphins scored a touchdown, I'd be kind of like, all right, excellent. But if I were watching a Chiefs game and the Chiefs scored a touchdown, I'd be, yeah, all right. And that's the difference. One is who I've decided to be. The other is who I really am.
I think a lot of this is based entirely on the presumption that gender and sex are the same thing, or that they're dependent on each other, which isn't true. And maybe it's just me, but to me it seems like it's obviously not true. Even as a cis person, I feel like my identity as a man has very little, if anything, to do with the fact that I have a penis.
It's got something to do with what makes me a man. In fact, it's actually pretty important. For most of us it is. It's very noble of you to rise above your biology without actually separating yourself from it. But then again, maybe it's not. That sounded pretty easy. For a real trans person to say that they're not defined by their genitals, that means something. For you to say it, or for me to say it, doesn't mean shit.
Now, like probably most people, I've been conditioned to assume people's gender based on their appearance. And to be honest, I don't think this is completely unreasonable, because gender is very closely related to gender roles. And gender roles include outward appearance and outward presentation. So if I see someone and my brain perceives it as a man, then I automatically think he. And if I see and I think it's a woman, then I automatically think she. And the majority of the time, this works out fine. But as I experience more trans and gender non-conforming people, it's become more important to me to not misgender people through the wrong use of pronouns. But I found it a challenge, not only because I don't and can't know someone's preferred pronouns until they tell me, but also because, like I said, I'm conditioned to react to people's appearance. But there are people who struggle to pass, or who have no desire to pass, or who are non-binary, so the concept of passing doesn't even apply. And in those situations, my instinctive reaction is not always correct. And even though I have a genuine desire to be respectful and inclusive, my initial involuntary impulse is often to use the wrong pronoun based on what I'm looking at. But what I do believe, though, is that there's no reason why you shouldn't use the pronouns that people ask you to use, or avoid using the pronouns that people don't identify with. Refusing to do so just seems like you're being an asshole for no reason.
Here we have it. This is the part that's the problem. An asshole for no reason. What was it you said before about talking past each other without making any attempt to understand? That's what you're doing right now.
Like, most of us have no problem calling someone something other than what their birth name is if they ask us to. Like, that's the name they identify with, so we call them that. Unless we're, like, specifically trying to piss them off.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
We call somebody what they want to be called in our society. For instance, I don't call somebody Julie if they prefer to be called Jordan.
Yeah, see, this sounds like a solid point. But the problem is, if I met someone who told me that they prefer to go by the name Super Stud or Planetary Annihilator, then I wouldn't be too inclined to humor them. So this is a really bad example. It proves nothing.
This is complicated by the fact that in English there's no grammatically appropriate gender-neutral singular pronoun.
Yeah, there's a reason for that.
And we really need this.
No, we don't.
Because, like I said, we can't know someone's preferred pronouns until they tell us. Many things have been proposed, like Z or E, or even more archaic things like Hugh or Thon. And by the way, there's this perception that people are like inventing personalized pronouns to use just for themselves because they're special little snowflakes. And maybe there are some imaginative teenagers on the internet doing that, but really what I think is going on is people are proposing gender-neutral pronouns to use for themselves and everyone else.
Oh. How magnanimous of them to alter language for the entire population instead of just for themselves. You see, that doesn't make it better, that makes it worse. Now, proposing this idea is not arrogant at all. Expecting people to adhere to it is, and you are expecting people to adhere to it because, after all, if someone refuses to use the pronouns,
you're being an asshole for no reason. But I think the one that's catching on the most is they, which is useful because it's already a standard English word. And even though it's grammatically dubious, it still sounds natural in most contexts just because of the way we talk. Like if I say something like, I went to my doctor and they told me to take these pills, no one even thinks twice about that.
I talked to Fred on the phone earlier today. They're doing great.
Wait a minute. I thought Fred lived alone, though.
Yeah. Anyway, and oh, I dropped George off at the doctor's, by the way. They were really nervous.
Oh, wait, the doctors were nervous?
No, George was nervous.
What?
Yeah, this isn't going to work.
If in doubt, just call people by their name. And failing that, just use they, and we'll go from there.
The problem is that a lot of people don't want you to use the pronoun they. They want you to use the pronoun Z or whatever. There are a lot of pronoun warriors who expect us to use pronouns on an individual basis. Every person gets to decide their pronoun, and you are supposed to remember it.
Here's a great little tip for people who are despairing at the possibility of remembering all those pronouns. What I do is just program in the pronoun next to the person's name in my smartphone. So whenever I'm out and about and I've forgotten whether one of my trans friends uses Z or Zer or they or them or something else, I just look it up and it's really super easy. And by the way, I only have half a dozen or so that I actually use on an everyday basis, so it's not all that difficult.
So it isn't as simple as using the pronoun they and going from there.
It can be a challenge to reverse one's conditioning, but just because it's difficult for some of us doesn't mean that we're exempt from making an effort to be respectful.
See, this is talking past people. People are not avoiding the pronouns out of disrespect. Maybe you've missed it, but a lot of people believe that there are only two genders. I will never use the pronouns Z or Zer, and I'm not alone.
I mean, I draw the line somewhere. For example, I refuse to use pronouns like Z, them, zer.
Now maybe refusing to use these words means that I'm being
An asshole for no reason.
Professor Peterson, do you think it's reasonable for people to say that?
Like if they think you're being an annoying son of a bitch, they might tell you that, and it's possible that you are, even though your self-concept might not include that.
Oh. Well, I guess I'll have to live with that. But you know, when you say this,
You're being an asshole for no reason.
it's not the asshole part that bothers me. You can call me or anyone else you disagree with an asshole or an annoying son of a bitch, and that's okay. It's the for no reason part that bothers me. Now, I looked through the comments on this video. Here's one. Since personal identity is the be-all and end-all, can I identify as a T-Rex? You answered that. There is a difference between expressing your identity and making a statement that is provably false. And my guess is that you know that. See, that's a good answer. But you haven't closed the point. In fact, here's another comment that brings us back to the football analogy. I would say that your original analogy is a false equivalency. It's more like if you said, I'm a Lagos lizard fan. And I said, no, you can't be that because the Lagos lizards are nothing. That being that if you're comparing it to people claiming to be non-binary, gender fluid, or any other non-male, female gender. So you can be a Packers fan if you want, but you cannot be the fan of a team that just doesn't exist. And I know you believe that binary and gender fluid do exist, but I don't. And that's the part of the argument that you're pretending isn't there. It's a point that you're just ignoring. A lot of people believe that there are only two genders.
There are 2 genders.
Claiming a particular identity doesn't give you that identity.
Who here wants to be a fire engine?
Saying that you're a particular thing doesn't make it so.
I'm to be 19.
Thinking that you're a particular thing doesn't even make it so.
I'm Buzz Lightyear, Space Ranger, Universe Protection Unit.
You cannot just choose an identity. It's not that simple. I may not be able to choose your identity for you or anyone else's, but I can't just choose my own identity. I can't just decide I'm going to be something and then say this is how people will think of me. It doesn't work that way. I would call any of these people she. But if any of them wanted to be called Z, then she'd be out of luck. A person can be the gender that is opposed to their sex. I believe that, and I'll act accordingly. See, I don't believe that a person can be something other than a man or a woman. The only exception to that is someone who is intersex, someone who genuinely has the biological traits of both male and female. If I meet someone like that and they want a special pronoun, then I might accommodate. But for just anyone who claims to be non-binary or gender fluid, for them, I'm not going to do it. Am I denying their identity, though? Not really. See, if someone wants to believe that they're non-binary, that's their business. And if that person tells me that they want me to use pronouns like Z and Zer, I won't hold that against them. I won't actually use the pronouns, though. Isn't that being an asshole, though? Well, maybe. But if I were to become non-binary, or if I were to realize that I've been non-binary all along, and if because of that I were to decide that I want special pronouns, then I might tell people that, but I wouldn't expect it. And it wouldn't bother me if they didn't, because my identity does not and will not depend on the approval of others. So I'm going to continue being an asshole, but not for no reason.